Done.
Okay, so welcome to everyone. So this is the fourth of our monthly Zoom drop-in sessions being hosted by Mindfulness Wales. And it's good to see some new faces. It's good to see some familiar faces as well. So I just want to extend a really warm welcome to everyone on, I suppose, on behalf of the committee, of those of us who are running Mindfulness Wales, with the trustees of it anyway. And particularly because today's session is on the theme of diversity and inclusion. And we decided to run this after the initial session, which was really just saying who we are, what our thoughts are about what we can do, and asking what people's concerns were, what the issues were, what we ought to be exploring. And one of the things that came up in a very broad sense was what you could call diversity, which really means, in a way it's easiest to say what it isn't, or what the problem is. The problem is the mindfulness world, the people engaging with mindfulness, not representing the whole range of society. So why not? So we decided that we would have a session tonight exploring that. I'll say a bit more later on, when we come to introduce the speakers. Maybe I'll just say who they are. So first of all, we have, no, I won't do that now, actually. I would like to invite Daniel Wilson to lead a short meditation to let us settle. And well, Daniel is one of our speakers tonight. And I don't think I'll introduce you now, Dan. We'll say something in a little bit later, but I'm very happy that you're joining us along with Sarah Silverton and Richard Bundy, who are all going to be speaking. And over to you, Dan, to lead the meditation.
Thank you. I'd like to invite you all now to close your eyes or look down on the floor, whichever feels more comfortable for you. And bring your attention now to a focus point. It might be feeling your feet on the floor, or perhaps the surface you're sitting on. For some of you, perhaps it might be your breath. So just focusing on that focal point for a little while. And now pulling your attention back so you can feel the whole of your body. Just noticing any parts of your body where after a long day, perhaps you might feel some tension. Just noticing any part of your body that maybe you're holding a bit tight. And then bring the attention back into the body, this time starting at the feet. Just noticing the feet and intentionally curling your toes as tight as you can, then letting them go. And then moving your attention now to your legs. Perhaps it might be your calves or top of your legs. Tensing them for maybe 2 or 3 breaths, as hard as you can. And then letting that go. And then moving your attention now to the area of your stomach and the small of your back. Tensing that as well for another 2 or 3 seconds. And then letting that go. And now focusing your attention now to your shoulder area, if you can. Again, tensing your shoulders as much as you can, as hard as you can for 2 or 3 breaths. And then letting that go. Now moving your attention to your hands. If you're resting your hands on your lap, or if you've got them in an upright position, seeing where they can, again, tense them for 2 or 3 breaths. And letting that go. And now your attention, moving that to your neck, seeing where they can tense your neck muscles for 2 or 3 breaths. And then letting that go. And then to your jaw area, seeing where they can clench your jaw for 2 or 3 breaths. And then letting that go. And finally, to your forehead or your face area, squeezing that as hard as you can. And then letting that go. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes or raise your eyes and just let in everything. And then open your eyes when you're ready. You're on mute.
Rookie error. Thank you, Daniel. And yeah, I feel present now. So on behalf of Mindfulness Wales, I want to say, well done, Wales, who've just beaten Italy 2-0. Sorry, Turkey 2-0. If you were watching the game, then now we're making a transition. And if you weren't watching the game, I want to know why not. So, diversity and inclusion and so on and so forth. So I've been thinking about this, talking with Liz and others, and thinking how can we respond to the kind of concerns that were raised on our first session. And one thing that became clear quite quickly is that the point about diversity is very diverse. You know, there are so many different groups and needs that we could have looked at and we could have addressed. I mean, for example, the Gwenan, who it's lovely to see you again here, raised the subject of Welsh language. And that in a way comes under the heading of diversity. But we decided that we wouldn't be able to do it justice. And what we would like to do is to have a session dedicated to Welsh language issues. So you see what I mean? Rather than tacking it on to tonight. And it's not possible to cover all of the needs and all of the groups that who might have issues around feeling included or not being represented. So we have 3 speakers, and I feel I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say and to hearing your responses to that. Everyone else who's here, and your thoughts about that. What are the concerns that are really there when we come to think, how can we make mindfulness available to everyone in Wales? Whatever it is that we have to offer through mindfulness, what are the barriers that are preventing some people from accessing that or knowing about it or feeling it's for them or whatever that might be? So the first, so we have 3 speakers. I'll just say briefly who each is. So Sarah Silverton, probably most of you know Sarah or have heard of her. She's been a long time part of this mindfulness world in Wales, particularly through her involvement over many years with Bangor and the Centre for Mindfulness Research and Practice, with mindfulness in education. And many of you will know her work developing the present. I won't say more about that because that's what Sarah's going to talk about. So then Daniel is a teacher in Evervale and will be speaking about his experience as a Black person in relation to mindfulness, but also his experience of that community. And Richard Bundy, very happy that Richard's with us, is the executive director of Valley Steps, which works extensively with, I suppose you could say deprived communities, but really the whole community in the Welsh Valleys. So one of the issues around diversity is especially relevant in Wales is geography. I'm happy that we have someone from North Wales speaking tonight, and that's Sarah Silverton. And so each of the speakers will have 10 minutes. I'd just like to invite you now, Sarah, to tell us your thoughts about the issues around diversity and everything that you have developed through your work as a response to those issues.
So Shapani. So I was kind of giggling a little bit about being on the panel for being, about diversity and being a white middle-aged woman. And, there's kind of, who am I to be talking about this? So I'm kind of really clear that I'm talking about this from experience of teaching lots of groups over a number of years and just recognizing a pattern, recognizing how this has changed perhaps in the last 5 years, but really keen over the years to respond to what we've been finding and not just offering something very specific that only meets a certain group of the population and excludes others. And I really want to talk about it in terms of participants, but also in terms of teachers, and trainers. Because it's not only about who's coming to classes, but it's definitely about who's offering classes and how they're being offered, isn't it? People will be reached if the person that's speaking to them really speaks to them. So I think there is a big problem. I think the problem is that that the group of people who come are predominantly white, predominantly female, predominantly of a certain age, so not very young, not very old. We rarely get more than 2 men in a group. When I've talked to supervisees about the difference between working with groups of men and working with groups of women, clearly they need different things even within a group structure of a way of receiving mindfulness. And I think, for lots of people coming to an 8-week course is just unacceptable anyway. Being part of a group, perhaps specifically online. I don't know, for some people that's easier, but others that's more challenging. Just being part of that structure and giving up that amount of time to some learning isn't easy for many people, busy lifestyles, family situations. So I think, what I really invite us to all be doing is wondering about what the structure is that's available at the moment, and really thinking about how we might think outside the box with that. Those of you that have done MBSR, do you remember the 9 dots? So what I'm really inviting us to think about is how to go outside the 9 dots to create the shape. Do you remember that picture? So there's some of the issues I think around this, so that for many years we've all been trained in a certain way. We've been trained with fabulous curricula that have got good research evidence. So we're very loyal to those, and we really value them. They're great courses, but I think it's a kind of it's being able to think beyond that. Without feeling like or in any way criticizing what's on offer at the moment. They're good for some people, but what I'm, rather than throwing that out, is thinking about how that might be adapted, or how we might create something different that would be more accessible, or a different way in that might lead people to doing those courses later on. I think there's a growing feeling, isn't there, in the mindfulness world that, as opposed to many years ago when we used to invite people to do an 8-week course and that was it. You've had your mindfulness teaching, off you go. And I think most people recognise now that there's a need to carry on, that to keep supporting people to learn, to develop their understanding and practice and apply it to everyday life. So I think this is an opportunity for us, isn't it, to not think about whatever we're offering as being something that's instead of, but in terms of there being different doorways, perhaps into the same learning. In education, we're very aware that people learn differently, that there are different modes of learning. Some people are audio, kinesthetic, visual learners, a mixture. Some people learn easily sitting still. Some people can't sit still for many minutes, and that would be really challenging for them. So in terms of just learning, the invitation that I'm offering is to really think about how do we include all sorts of different learning that just might include anybody, human beings generally, rather than thinking about their, sex, age, ethnicity, whatever. It's to just think about humanness. So what we've been doing with the present course is to offer somebody called it reversing into mindfulness. So it's almost a kind of paradoxical approach where we're saying, well, come and see what you think. Have a go in your daily life initially. We don't want you to do any formal practice initially. Just go off and have a go with this in connection to what you're doing already. And to start to bring attitudes of curiosity and interest and friendliness and maybe humour to what we're finding in ourselves and our lives, and then completely making choices from there. What we want to practice, what do we want to develop in our life? So it's completely person driven. We're inviting people to engage, we're inviting them to connect with who they are, how their life is, making it really relevant to whatever their lifestyle and situation and busyness might be. And then, well, how do you want to practice? And having a much broader range of possibilities of what mindfulness practice is. So not just sitting still with eyes closed with a a kind of intention to have a focus in one place, but maybe wide, eyes open, sensory awareness practices, a kind of exploring different ways that we might focus, ways that we might connect, how our mind and bodies, how do we experience them? Not how do we improve them, but how do we, even show up for them and start to tune in to what they're saying to us, and then from there we can respond, can't we? We can develop some practices and skills that will suit us to kind of work with ourselves in the way that we want to. And we really hope that that's the way that people will carry on using the practice long after the 8 weeks, really encouraging people to be autonomous early on. So what I really want to kind of, trying to communicate here is the sense of that actually then it doesn't matter, you're just being met as a human being, and your setting, your interests, your values, your situation, your wishes for yourself and your life, they're yours, and they're what you're working with if you come to Living in the Present course. So it's a kind of flipping things in a way that we do encourage people to practice, have a go with some eyes closed practices as the course goes on. And my sense is from teaching other curricula to busy people that actually people are practicing a lot more by the end of the course than they were when we were telling them how to practice, and they were resisting that because they didn't quite see the point and they couldn't quite connect with what was being offered. So in a way that, teaching this, and Liz is teaching this, and other people in the room are teaching it too, I think. So it's a sense of us not having the answers. We're not teaching, we're inviting. We're wondering with people about what this might mean for them in their lives. So it sounds really different, doesn't it? But we've completely stayed with John Kabat-Zinn's definition. That's exactly what we're practicing, but we're just broadening what the way that people might do that. And I, it's interesting, isn't it? It's challenging to do things differently. It can feel disloyal to do things differently, and yet I think we have to. I really, really suggest that there's a time now when we can bridge the gap between the more traditional formal courses and the apps that people turn to as an introduction, and teaching, learning to teach this in a really authentic, clarity of intention way, so that we can offer mindfulness, really mindfulness to other people in a skillful but light and invitational way. Means that people, I think a lot of people have been put off mindfulness because they haven't had an experience of mindfulness. It's been called mindfulness, but it's actually something else, or not offered by people with training in teaching mindfulness. So lots of people are kind of, the M word. And I guess that's the biggest challenge, do we always have to call it mindfulness? Maybe we call it something else? If the block is around coming to a mindfulness course because what the kind of preconceptions are of that. So there's something about thinking outside the box. There's something about just really wondering, what do people need? What are they asking for? What will they engage with? How are they actually going to live more mindfully? That's what we want for everyone, isn't it? We don't, if practicing meditation helps us get there, wonderful. But if we're not going to practice reliably with formal practice, then how do we invite people in to engage with themselves and their lives in a mindful way? That's what we've been exploring. That feels like 10 minutes for Shapani, but I'm not sure. It's
yeah, if you're ready to stop, then we can stop there.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, remove spotlight. Good. So, well, okay. Thank you very much for that, Sarah. I actually did the training, the present training, last year with Sarah, and it was very different. It took me a while to get a sense of what the difference was. That it wasn't about delivering a course with certain material. It was about identifying the qualities that were connected with mindfulness and then being quite flexible, really, although with some really incisive guidance, really very helpful guidance about how you get to those qualities. So thank you so much, Sarah, for bringing all of your experience and sharing that with us. And so the way the evening's going to go, we'll have our 3 speakers. Hopefully we'll have time for people in pairs or maybe threes to just mull over what's been said. And then we'll come back and we'll have a plenary. So if you have any questions for Sarah, who's the one who's spoken so far, then, register them, have them in mind. You could put them in the chat. In fact, you can put any reflections, any contributions that you'd like to make in the chat, and we'll try to integrate them with the evening as it goes on. And at the very least, we'll have a record of the things that are of concern for you. And we do want to be responsive to what everyone's interested in. So now it's Daniel, who we've already heard from. I've already said that you're a teacher in Ebbw Vale. But I was speaking to Daniel a couple of days ago. We hadn't met before, but Daniel had been recommended to me by a couple of people. So I'm really pleased that you can. I mean, as a person of colour and as someone who's working in one of the communities that, often wouldn't usually be able to access mindfulness. And of course, it's a diverse community in itself in Ebbw Vale. So Liz, before I hand over to Daniel, is it working? I spotlighted Liz. Is it working with the pinning and spotlighting? Can I leave that to you? Yeah, okay, you're muted. So
I pinned you at the moment. So is that working for everyone? Have you got Vishwapani pinned and
my big? Okay, so
whoever's speaking
for me. All right. So anyway, we'll sort all that out. But Daniel, invite you to share your experience now.
Thank you, Vishwapani. Good evening, everybody. While I was listening to the first speaker, which was amazing to listen to, I just had a quick flick through to see, the ethnicity range of people at tonight's meeting, and it just kind of like brought to mind, the whole point of today's event, which is diversity and how do we widen mindfulness to people. And speaking as a person of color and being a Black person, it's interesting because what drew me into mindfulness, somebody told me about mindfulness back in 2016, and I said, yeah, I'm too busy, and left it to that. Then 2017, then I saw an advert, and now what drew me to investigating further was it said mindfulness for busy teachers, and I went, oh, I'm one of those. So I went along to find out what this mindfulness thing was all about. Now, for me, because it was Tim who was leading that introduction to mindfulness, Tim Anfield, who we all know, and what resonated with me, ironically, was the practice. because my background, because my dad is from Ghana, West Africa, my mum is from Jamaica. So that type of background, very, very religious, which is all about, praying and then having time to think and just be quiet and just listen. So for me, when we went into the practice, it felt very familiar and comfortable because that's how I was brought up. Now, it was interesting because when I told my mum that I am now doing mindfulness, she was a bit wary because she wasn't too sure, because all she was aware of was the fact of its background coming from the Hindu religion. But I explained to her, actually, no, it's secular. And when I was talking to Vishwapani about possible misconceptions about mindfulness, it just reminded me how my mum, and certainly speaking to other family members and other Black people I know, where they say, oh, no, mindfulness is not for me because I'm covered by religion. If I'm feeling anxious or whatever, I just go on my knees and pray to him upstairs or her. And I get my solace that way. So it's been interesting listening to their viewpoints. And I also kind of like ask some questions to other Black educators from around the UK. Say what has been their feedback and their perceptions. Do any of them actually practice mindfulness? And what was coming back to me again and again was the fact that, no, I don't really do mindfulness because I get a lot of solace from prayer. So that's the initial battle. Now, as a teacher, I'm in a relatively unique situation in the sense that I live in the South Wales Valleys. I live just past Pontypridd. And I've spent all my teaching career in Abervale, which is predominantly white. Although the past 10 to 12 years, we've had a lot of ethnic minorities move into the South Wales area generally, and particularly moving further and further from Cardiff into the valleys. And the 3 to 16 school that I teach in, certainly now, I think it's fair to say from reception, from nursery all the way up now to year 11, there's at least an ethnic minority pupil in every year group. The perception, I've been teaching mindfulness now since 2018. So prior to COVID, I was teaching mindfulness to the children, and particularly the year 7s. And it is involved, sending a letter out to the parents, inviting the parents and the children along to the introductions. At least the parents knew what they were letting their kids into, and which the parents found quite reassuring. And it wasn't until Vishwapani actually asked me the question of how many ethnic minority parents came to the introduction session with their children. And when I thought about it, I went, that's a very good point. I had one in the 3 years or 2 years that I was teaching mindfulness. And the mother didn't come along to the introduction, but the 2 children did. And they came to 2 sessions, the first 2 sessions, and they didn't come to the rest of the course. So that was interesting. Now, what I certainly would think one of the barriers would be is not necessarily the color of the skin, but perhaps, and this thinking as a teacher communicating with the community, which is what has been the experience. And this is something that I think we all as educators teaching mindfulness to be aware of. What has been the communication between the school and the community in the past? So have the parents had a positive or negative interaction with the school, in the sense that the school normally been ringing them because the children have been naughty, or anytime the school rings is for negative connotation as opposed to positive? Because if you're then sending a letter saying we'd like to invite you to come along to help your children with mindfulness, or they think, yeah, I haven't had a positive experience with the school, not for me, thank you. Another thing that could possibly be challenging is as Sarah said very, very well, is perhaps maybe the way mindfulness is taught, which is a lot of people seem to focus, particularly if they haven't investigated mindfulness properly themselves. What most people are aware of with regards to mindfulness is the practice. So maybe they think, no, that I'm not too happy about. I'm quite happy with the religious aspect. So as Sarah was saying, maybe thinking about how we teach mindfulness. So that is from the parents maybe thinking about whether to allow their children to participate in mindfulness. However, and for me, this is the potential. It's almost like the perfect storm of happy coincidence. Number one, change of the Welsh curriculum. So as a parent, whether you like it or not, your child is going to be taught this. Second, it's been COVID. So I think irrespective of ethnicity, of whether you're male or female, I think as parents, we all are aware of how anxious our children have been. And from speaking to parents, from speaking to a lot of the children, because I'm a tutor, is they're feeling quite anxious. So this is the ideal opportunity where we are selling, not selling a solution, but practical ways in which the children can deal with the early signs of anxiety, because a lot of parents will agree that the waiting list for everything is increased dramatically. So whether it's child counselor or whatever, the number of emails I get from a head of year every day or every week regarding, getting emails from parents about worried about the child's anxiety. Now, as a person of color, one of the difficulties, particularly as a man, one of the difficulties that I've always had talking with others is being anxious. And as Sarah pointed out rightly, very few men tend to do mindfulness. Very few men of color will certainly admit, because there's this persona, or this, not persona, but this image out that they've got to be tough. One of the challenges that people of color sometimes have, and the children speak to the parents, is about how anxious they feel. And the amount of times where maybe my nephews, or perhaps people's children, have sometimes said to them they're feeling a bit anxious, the feedback has been, oh no, you can tough it out. We're strong people, pray about it, and you can work your way through that anxiety, as opposed to actually saying, oh, maybe there might be other avenues. So just some things to think about, perhaps about communication, because I'm very much aware that my 10 minutes is almost up. So just something maybe to think about as to why maybe not enough people of color are joining, but there is opportunities and hopes out there.
Lovely. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for sharing your experience. Yeah, there's quite a lot to think about there. Your own experience of what it is to be a Black man coming to mindfulness, your observations of the community and some of the barriers, some of the inhibitions that people might be feeling. Okay, we'll come to Richard now. So, actually, when I asked Daniel, first of all, I was aware that he was a person of color and that would be relevant to the diversity session. But I was also thinking about the people that he works with, the communities in Ebbw Vale, and that's a diversity issue as well. And you did touch on that, for the white people there in Ebbw Vale. And this is what Richard is going to be. This is Richard's work. So I am a big fan of Valley Steps. There's been quite a lot of talk about taking mindfulness into the community. We had quite a big encouragement from the Welsh Government, from Mark Drakeford, in fact, that communities are an important value of resource, that things need to come from the bottom up. I hear that talked about. I hear meeting disadvantaged communities. I hear that talked about quite broadly. But Richard's actually doing it. So Richard is the Executive Director of Valley Steps, which works in South Wales, particularly in the valleys. I won't say any more. I'll just hand over to Richard and invite you to tell us about why you do what you do and what you do.
Right, thank you. And it's great to be here today. And I'd just highlight, I'm not doing it. There's a whole team out there doing it, and I'm pleased that one of my colleagues, Hayley, is here today, who's actually piloted the present and is also delivering on our sort of core open program. I think given the conversation that's been held already, it's come up both in Daniel's when he's talking and Sarah about the issues around, you know, generally mindfulness is attracting people of a certain type and less men. And I think, you know, it would be helpful if I just share a video, because it might set things into context. So I'll just a brief video. Hello, my name is Philip Denscombe. I'm 36 years old. About 6 months ago, I suffered a heart attack. I ended up having a quadruple bypass, and it affected my health, but also affected my mind as well, which after a lot of persuasion from my family members and my girlfriend, I finally decided to give in and give Valley Steps a go, see what it was all about. What did mindfulness do for me? It helped me deal with everything that I've been through. It helped me deal with anxiety, it helped me deal with stress, and just helped me deal with everyday life in general with just a set of tools that were given to me for nothing. After the mindfulness course, I then went on to stress control, and that again helped me loads with just dealing with things. And now, I suppose I just feel a lot better in life in general. I'm more positive. Everyone has told me I'm just a nicer person to be around, and I just find that I'm coping with life so much better in such a better way. I hope the audio worked there. Can you give me a thumbs up? Brilliant. I think part of the challenge, you know, in terms of the values, has also been engaging. Excuse me.
Have you lost the screen?
I seem to have gone on to autoplay with YouTube onto another video.
We're not seeing it, Richard. Just if you just stay on the Zoom screen and just keep speaking, it doesn't matter what else is going on.
I can't see. That's better. Sorry, I've managed to minimize myself in the process.
Yeah.
So, you know, the issue of engaging men has been a particular challenge, and I don't think that's just purely in terms of mindfulness. I think it's men accessing services to address their health and well-being. I mean, Valley Steps was developed within the Health Board, within the context of the Cwmtaf local health board area, which at the time was RCT and Merthyr, experiencing the highest rates of mental health problems in England and Wales, the highest rates of prescribing of antidepressants, the highest rates of suicide, particularly amongst men. And I think Cwmtaf took a leap of faith in terms of providing an alternative. I think there was a view that if we just continue doing things the same way, we'll probably continue getting the same results. So, following a very successful pilot of a program developed by a psychologist based within the health board, Sunam, a program was developed called Mindfulness for Every Day, which is a 6-week program. And the ambition really was to deliver a program of mindfulness, but also stress control at scale. So reaching out to the general population. And really important part of that is how do you reach out to people? Picking up on the point that's already been made, RCT and Merthyr have the highest levels of multiple deprivation in Wales. If you look at the map, particularly in the northern parts of RCT and Merthyr, you'll see significant poverty, and also people with generally poorer health. And mental health has been a particular theme. So, we sought to develop a program at probably a scale that hadn't been seen anywhere else in Wales. And sort of by 2019-20, we were delivering 106-week courses a year across the expanded Cwmtaf footprint, because at that point Bridgend also became part of our remit. 50% of those were 6-week mindfulness for everyday courses, and the other 6 weeks program was stress control. And we were engaging around 2,900 people attending 6-week courses during the course of that period. And then obviously we all know what happened in sort of March of last year. But of course, because we're coming from a health perspective, what we a lot of our remit was to provide choice both to individuals but also to professionals, and giving alternatives. So we're not against antidepressants because they can be life-saving for many, but all too many people are prescribed antidepressants not because it's the best option, but because GPs see it as the only option because of long waiting lists or other services. So we were very much in that ground. But one thing that I've certainly found particularly helpful in terms of broadening reach, how you get out into communities, was this concept developed by the Behavioural Insights Unit, who've developed an acronym called EAST, which means that people will access a service and then hopefully derive the behaviour change that comes with it. If you make it easy, if you make it accessible, if you make it social. So if you see other people like you doing something, you're more likely to gravitate towards that. And then if you make it timely. So, the point about that is very often when people make a decision to seek help, if they then get told there's a long waiting list, they probably won't then engage with a service. If the service is delivered almost at point of need, people are more likely to engage. So that's what we've sought to do. So of those courses, we've run in community centres. We run in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening to make it accessible. We do sort of assertive outreach into communities, developing links with other organisations, because if you're introduced by someone who's known to people, or by people who are known to individuals, they're more likely to trust those recommendations and access the service. So, we've certainly made a huge amount of efforts to kind of engage communities, deliver in places that they're familiar with. The deliberate attempt was made to establish us as a standalone charity, so that we weren't seen as part of the NHS. We were seen as a community-based service. So, we'll deliver in rugby clubs, we'll deliver in museums, we'll deliver in church halls, we'll deliver in community centres, we'll deliver a limited amount of services in health settings. And I think that approach has been particularly successful, and by delivering at scale, hopefully people when they're signposted or become aware of us, they won't have to wait, because they can register for a course near them at a time that hopefully suits them. And as the project has grown, increasingly we're finding people coming via word of mouth. So you almost create a movement within communities focusing on well-being. And I think, you know, the example that Phil set is a measure of some of our success. But not only that, if you look at things like the outcomes, because we're commissioned by the Health Board, we've been particularly keen to measure distance travelled for individuals. So we undertake a Warwick-Edinburgh mental wellbeing scale, which is a sort of a validated outcomes monitoring tool, which is showing that people who've engaged in those 6-week courses are reporting significant improvements to their well-being at the end of a course. And then an independent evaluation by the University of South Wales Institute for Health and Social Care carried out 6-month follow-ups, which showed that people were reporting the same levels of well-being 6 months afterwards as they were reporting at the end of the course. So it's delivering, I think, meaningful outcomes for people. And increasingly, we're seeing a broad range of organisations signposting to us. So it's job centres, it's third sector organisations, it's GPs, it's a whole host of organisations, as well as people coming to us via word of mouth and recommendations. And as you can probably tell from Phil's video, via a little bit of pressure from family members. But you know, we're certainly achieving a large scale, a large sort of amount of reach. And, you know, for a small organisation, I think it's fair to say that Valley Steps has become a recognised sort of brand, if you like, within Cwmtaf Morgannwg. Touched upon other things that we've done. More recently, sort of January to March, we were engaged in a pilot of the present with Aneurin Bevan and Roberts here, and we've worked closely on trying to make that a success. And I think, although it's a different model, some of the principles around it were that people could access it without a referral. They would register an interest. It was free. It was delivered throughout the week, so it wasn't. Hopefully there was choice for people, and I think that approach has also proved successful. And I suppose the other thing that I'd say is that the pandemic has taught us a lot, but certainly by the end of March, if you count the number of people who've engaged in our services, including the online offer, we've reached between 9,000 and 10,000 people since 2016, and that, I think we feel justifiably proud of that, and it's certainly been successful. I think it's an approach that could and should be adopted elsewhere. I think part of the challenge, I think Vishwapani, you and I were talking earlier, that sometimes there are lots of barriers put in people's way, particularly in areas with significant poverty. Perhaps when you're faced with the choice between paying for a bus fare to access the service or feeding your children that day, that's a really difficult choice to make, and an impossible choice for many. So having the service in people's communities is certainly vital from my perspective, if you're going to engage those in isolated, sort of deprived communities. I think added to that, this secondary gain, as we've seen it, we've found that quite a significant number of our volunteers, and we have about 25 to 30 volunteers. Many of those are people who've been through the programme and want to give something back. So you get added value from that direct community engagement, and you generate a lot of goodwill, and hopefully that drives the momentum behind that kind of initiative. So I don't know if I've eaten into too much time, Vishwapani, but that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour.
Okay, thank you so much. Look, I stop looking at my watch because I was so compelled by what you were saying, actually. And I wanted you to have time to just to share what you're doing, because I really think Valley Steps is pretty unique. I mean, it's certainly unique in Wales, and that's important if we're looking at models. You know, as Mindfulness Wales, we're looking at models we can advocate for other parts of Wales, but actually I think it's unique, much wider than that. So we're actually on schedule. Let's have 10 minutes now in groups. I see 18 participants. So Liz, are you setting up breakout rooms? Are we ready to do that?
Rob is on breakout duty.
Rob is on breakout duty, okay. Okay, so before we start these groups, I mean, look, we'll be in pairs because we're not going to give this lots of time. We have 3 speakers tonight, so we wanted everyone to be able to say their bit. So a suggestion is that in the pairs, first of all, think about, is there a problem? What is the problem? Is there a problem about inclusion and diversity, and why? And what do you think? And secondly, what are your responses to what other people have said by way of solutions or answers to ways of addressing those problems? And what are your thoughts? And maybe what's your experience of your own work? Because I see 1 or 2 people in the group who I know who are doing exactly this work and doing very innovative work and could equally have spoken tonight. So let's go into those groups, and we'll have 10 minutes in the groups, and that hopefully will allow enough time to bring points back from the groups. Please share them in the chat, then I can nominate you to say something if you want to, and we can hear from the speakers, their responses. Okay, we ready for the breakout rooms, Rob? And really, what I'd like to do now is to hear your questions and to hear your reflections. A good way to do that, this has worked in the past, is to just say something in the chat, and then that might be enough, or it could be that I'll then come to you and ask you for your point. So what do we have in the chat? Nothing yet. I'll just mention something that Sarah, I was in Sarah's room. Sarah, we were in the room together. And something she said also came up talking with Daniel, which is, no, sorry, not with Daniel, with Richard the other day in preparation, which is about funding. You know, I teach private mindfulness, well, through my own business. I've run mindfulness courses over the years. And of course, I charge something in the region of £180 for them. So that's a limitation right there. Then we have Rob from An Iron Bevan. And so then there's a question about funding and what Valley Steps has had some funding, but you know, that's always a struggle. So there's one issue about funding, and what is it that can help us to spread the really good practice we've heard tonight across Wales, and how can there be funding? Okay, so yes. Right. So okay, so we've got Identity and whole family accessibility issues from Erica. Okay, let's just take that one. Erica, would you like to say something about what you have in mind?
So am I muted or am I not?
No, we're hearing you. That's okay.
What we sort of, what's come across from the speakers and what we chatted about was this sense of people need to identify with mindfulness in whatever format it is, and what a biggest barrier is if they think it is middle class white women, they're not identifying with it. And in Wales particularly, as we've already said, we have got such entrenched deprivation that you have got families that are not identifying with, from an economic point of view, from an educational point of view, they're not identifying with who are leading the services, or that how it's packaged is not identifiable to them. So they think that mindfulness is a certain way or for a certain type of person. So we need to be able to break down those barriers of identity to help bridge that gap. We also noticed in our work, what we've found is that actually...
Erica, can you just say what your work is?
Oh, sorry, I run a charity called Mountain Movers Education, and we support families that are electively home educating their children, particularly and primarily those with children with disabilities.
Okay.
So we support them with services, social, so that we reduce in socialization. We do the mindfulness courses with them, because obviously people with disabilities and carers have some of the highest levels of mental health illnesses. So that's kind of very important to us. But what we found with some of our projects that we've done with them is that whole family engagement is really needed to help the children engage with mindfulness and develop it further. We certainly noticed when the one project that we did, the children that were practicing mindfulness 6 months to a year down the line were the children that had their parents attending and doing and learning mindfulness with them, versus the children that weren't being supported by a parent in those classes. So that was a big, but then we've also got accessibility issues. If you're talking about children with ADHD, PDA, autism, which is who we're working with, people aren't necessarily skilled or confident in teaching mindfulness in a way that's not prescribed, if that makes sense. So you have your courses and your curriculums that say we should be teaching it this way and that. I found it really helpful doing Sarah's present course, because that empowered my understanding of mindfulness, empowered me to know about mindfulness in everyday situations, that I can adapt whatever we're doing about mindfulness, because I know what the attention is. So it doesn't matter if we've got a kid that won't sit still or needs this adaptation. And that's where I think we really need, again, the identity, breaking down the barriers and having that confidence to come back.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, okay, so looking at these, I just wonder if Richard would like to say anything in response to that. These issues around identity and including the whole family and accessibility that Erica's mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, I would actually. I mean, there's several things going around in my mind in response to some of the issues raised, but I think what's important is to create different hooks for people. So that also touches upon Sarah's point about, not having a preconceived idea around what people need. And one of the things that came about, funnily enough, was that we had a GP attend our stress control program because she felt that if she was going to signpost people ethically, she wanted to know what it was about, and took her son along with her. and they both found they took a lot from it. And then she went on to the Mindfulness for Every Day and became, as she described, evangelic about what we do. But they were seeing a lot of parents presenting with young people, predominantly teenagers, presenting with emotional and mental health problems who they didn't want to give a career in mental health services to, and they didn't want to prescribe. So we developed a program called Families Together for Wellbeing, where young people and their parents or carer learn mindfulness techniques as well as elements of CBT-based sort of workshop type stuff. And that's based on the health psychology is very clear that, if you want someone to follow a prescription regime, the more messages you get confirming what you've got to do, the more likely someone's going to do it. And the same premise applies, that if you're able to continue the conversations over the breakfast table and over the dinner table with your parents, that's going to reinforce the learning and it will deliver better outcomes. That's been a challenge because of COVID, because I think all families have just been thrown into a state of chaos, haven't they? And that's something that we're looking to pick back up again, is just creating different hooks. And if you're looking at families, a targeted response to families is important. If you're looking at men, targeted response to men is important. And some of that might not be delivering a different offer. It might just be about your marketing and how you engage with people. But so that, I suppose, that's the primary thinking I had in response to Erica's point.
Okay. There are quite a few points being made. Thank you for that, Richard. I mean, that's really helpful. And there are quite a few points being made in the chat. And some of them are about, the practicalities, or where do you get your funding from? That's Chris Ruin's question and social prescribing, so what are all these models? But perhaps we can't really go into those now, but it's good to just mention them, that we need to understand the system, and someone who's really doing that is Rob Callan Davis. I just wonder if maybe just ask you if you've got any comments on what you've heard, Rob. So Rob is the head of or the person who's implementing mindfulness through Anara and Bevan.
Yeah, well,
Be on the spot now, man.
No, I've written quite a few things down actually. My thoughts around kind of around what I've heard. And I think there's been some really good points written in the chat there, and I think that's a really good way of capturing some of those, because sometimes we're out of time to do that. I'm from the community that was talked about. I'm from Blaenau Gwent. I was educated in Blaenau Gwent. My children were educated in Blaenau Gwent. So I do know that kind of, I guess, Valleys area from that point of view. And certainly I think some of the things that have been talked about in terms of engagement with children particularly, I think having parents understanding what children are going to learn, I think is really important. But there's lots of things in here. I mean, it seems quite a huge topic to deal with in such a small amount of time. There is the money thing. I know we touched on that, and the commissioning. One of the things I guess we could do with that is actually build in community places, perhaps, into commissioning. So I guess if we were commissioning an organisation like Valley Steps to deliver mindfulness, and someone like Sarah to teach the present to some teachers, we could actually build in some community places into a procurement if people were interested. It was a thought that came to mind. I think the language we use just generally it just makes it very complicated. Even just, I mean, going from academic literature and reports right through to the way we speak during the delivery of courses would not necessarily engage with people that I know in the communities that I've lived in. So that's, I guess, is something to consider from my point of view as well. And also I wondered if there were opportunities to create something that was even kind of a step down, which would be some kind of, I don't know, video or something that was accessible that was kind of didactically explaining some of the kind of key ideas in a really simple language, so that people could actually be signposted towards simple resources that maybe engage them. I know Richard talked about marketing then, which I think is important, and understanding who we're trying to get our ideas and opportunity to engage then to. But yeah, that was something else I've written down as something that maybe to think more about. So I just wondered if there's an opportunity to discuss this in more depth, perhaps. That was my thought, because this seems a really short window of opportunity.
You're muted.
Shall I start again?
No, you're all right, Rob. Richard Parney's muted.
Okay, look, so there's an invitation. So Rob is you are in a position to influence things within your sphere.
Yeah,
and Rob's one of the trustees at Mindfulness Wales. So if anyone would like to continue this conversation, and I see people bringing research experience, practical experience, then perhaps just put that in the chat now, and we can capture that and maybe put you in contact in some way. But look, we've merely touched on the surface of this topic. We can come back to it. I'd like to thank Sarah and Daniel and Rob. Sorry, not Rob. Thank you as well. But Richard, I'd thank you for your contributions. Thanks so much. I mean, I feel quite excited about this because the need is so clear. I mean, maybe we need to think about how we define it and identify it. But, one way or another, it's very clear that there's a need. And I think there's a lot of resources here, though, that can be brought together and made a difference. And what's happening in Cyntaf is, and also what's happening with Anara and Bevan, these are models that really need to be shared across Wales. So hopefully we can support that. We can work together through Mindfulness Wales. So I need to look. We do need support ourselves. I've put a link in the chat if you would like to make a donation. So obviously there's no charge for the session. We don't want to operate like that at all. But if we have funds, we can do more. So there's a PayPal link, and you can make whatever donation you like if you want to. That's the invitation. And I also want to mention our session next month with, we are again really, really pleased about that this is happening. Vidyamala Birch, who is the founder of Breathworks. She's someone who's for a very long time had chronic pain of quite a high order, but has responded to it in the most inspiring way through developing Breathworks. And Breathworks does all sorts of things as a large UK mindfulness organisation, but one of the things that it really specialises in is bringing mindfulness to people with chronic pain. So usually we talk about mindfulness with mental health, but there's the whole realm of physical health, starting with chronic pain. She's a very inspiring speaker. That will be on the 14th of July. So we have your emails, and we will be contacting you just to let you know once we've set the link up. Right. Well, it's 8:30. So that was good. Wales won 2-0, and we had 3 excellent speakers. So thank you to everyone. You unmute yourself, Sarah.
Many thanks, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. And
Yes, yeah, I just really want to thank you for sharing and participating.
anything that's going on beyond this